Hello and welcome to episode 6060 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live stream and career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. And this week on the podcast, I can't quite believe this either, I'm joined by the award-winning Irish singer-songwriter Declan O'Rourke. Now, it's been 17 years since I first discovered his fabulous music, and what a journey it's been. And a real delight earlier on in 2021 to have a new LP called Arrivals, released by Declan, produced by one Paul Weller. The most emotionally raw and affecting album of his career was recorded over 6 days at Black Barn Studios, otherwise known as Weller HQ. And to quote Declan, he was there every moment before, during and long after, discussing ideas about this and that, even down to the artwork. It was hugely impressive. So let's get into it. Declan O'Rourke, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure, Dan. Delighted to be on with you. Thank you.
Now, where in the world do we find you, and which room in the house is this? I can see a guitar, so I'm imagining that some magic happens in this room of some sort.
Yeah, this is my studio space, workspace. Don't know if you look around it. There's, out there, actually, you can't see it right now. All you see is a tree there. But the Atlantic Ocean is out there.
Oh, beautiful.
We're on the west coast of Ireland and Europe, really. My desk is, it's kind of
organized chaos.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is where I kind of live and dream, and I love this space.
And Ireland is the pull, because you started off in Ireland, then when it went down under, then back to Ireland. I mean, you consider Ireland to be home, I'm guessing.
I suppose I do, yeah. I mean, I think we're all kind of international these days, aren't we? Everything is so globalized and cultures and that. But I think just to be close to relatives and family, home is home. That's why I came home from Australia, really. I just realised I didn't want to be that guy who's so far away. And,
We've got family in Sydney, and you, particularly through what we've been through in the past 18 months, you do realise that connection of not being able to see each other properly in the flesh, and how far away that really is, even though we're connected by video calls and stuff these days. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Very true, yeah. I mean, we had become so convenient, you're only a day from anywhere on a plane. This has certainly made it feel more distant, doesn't it? Or given us back the sense of distance that really is there. It's kind of an illusion that it's not, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, look, I'm so excited that we've got you on the podcast, because your entire existence for me as a musician has coincided with Paul Weller, because it was Paul Weller that introduced me to you in the first place, which I would imagine is quite true of quite a lot of fans, because he's been a massive supporter from day one. But we'll get into all that in a sec, because first of all, I'd love to understand when it was that you first discovered the music of Paul Weller yourself.
Yeah, well, around 2006, I think, we were two of many artists on the V2 label in London, and Paul was the top of the tree. I'm sure their big signing, and I was this guy who nobody knew down the bottom, I'm sure, It was my first record out. I was aware at that stage of Paul Weller, but I couldn't name a song. That's being honest, and I guess how old was I then? Maybe 27. 28. What basically happened was my record was coming out. One of the A&R team at V2 told me just off the cuff, one of them had given Paul my record and that he really liked it, and that he liked one song in particular. He loves Galileo or something is what I heard. And I was like, yeah, right. I totally didn't believe it, and just kept saying, oh, thanks, but I really was dismissing it in my head. It just saying they're just pouring smoke into my pocket here, They were liable to say anything, and you couldn't really trust them, Nice people as they were. Their job is to boost you up and, all that kind of thing. So, the record came out kind of almost briefly. I got a phone call one day. I was in Dublin, actually. I was in a bar on a Sunday. A few of my friends playing songs in the corner. I used to sit in and play a couple of tunes with them. And I got a phone call, and I answered it. And it was hard to hear, but it was this very thick London accent, And I was trying to say, who's it? Sorry, hello. And it's like, it's Paul, Paul Weller here. And I was like, holy shit, he was just calling to say hi and I love your record. And I was like, oh my God, they weren't lying. That was our actual first contact, I suppose. And a few months later, he invited me. They were going to give him, I'm not sure what the award was exactly. It was a Brit Award, maybe a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. He was going to be doing a performance for that, is my understanding of it. He wanted to do a warm-up show in the 100 Club in Oxford Street, which is a cool little venue, only holds probably 100 people, 100 Club. And he invited me to open that show. And so I flew over and I met him there, and it was just the loveliest guy. All of you guys were the audience, all his fans. And I was this guy nobody knew from Ireland. And I was just about to walk onto stage, and I could, the noise in this room of people, the standing crowd. I was just saying to myself, there is no fucking way they're going to listen to me, They're not going to be interested at all. And I said to myself, I'm going to have to do something clever here to get their attention. And so I gave whoever was on the side of the stage, I said, will you hold my guitar for a minute? They said, yeah. And I walked onto the stage, walked up to the microphone, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Weller, And so the whole crowd went bananas and turned around and kind of just said, has asked me to play for 30 minutes before he comes on. I could hear the laughs and the kind of, you chancer, But I had their attention then, and I got a nice reception. But going back to your first question, what happened after that was Paul came onto stage and played this electric set. And, I was like, I know that song. Know that one too. Geez, I know that one. I know, and I was amazed at how much of his material I knew just from, absorbing over the years. And so that was great.
Yeah, it's funny because you're a similar age to me. I think you were born 76. I was born 75. Would that be right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So my discovery of Weller was not a diet of the Jam and the Style Council that I was aware of, but I think it was osmosis probably more than anything else. But I'm not sure how well that music traveled down under, because when you were a kid, you moved from Ireland to Australia, as we mentioned. But it's funny, isn't it? As soon as you hear those songs, you're like, yeah, I've heard that on the radio, or it's connected at some point, but you're not entirely sure where. It's funny, yeah.
I would say it was in Ireland. And probably, I moved to Australia when I was 10. And up until that, I wouldn't have been an avid radio listener, so I wouldn't have absorbed it that way. And I was back by the time I was 14 or 15, and I was playing music then. I went back to Australia when I was 19 and came back when I was 24. So I was gone for another chunk. Specifically when I came home from Australia when I was 24. From that period up until the period I just described when we had contact and I met him through, I was very aware of his name in Dublin. He was doing a lot of concerts, big shows, in and out a lot. And I knew he had a ginormous following in Ireland. So
we have to talk about that debut album of yours, because man, what a magical piece of work. Paul has taste, but that was such a lovely find when that became a recommendation through Galileo that you mentioned the single. But every track on that album is like a greatest hits for me. It's brilliant, honestly. It's like Love Is the Way, No Breaks, Sarah, One Way Minds. It's a terrific piece of work. Am I right in thinking that you didn't really play music back home to anybody else when in Australia? It was only when you came back to Ireland when you were like 24 then that you started playing music to other people?
Yeah, I was 24 when I played my first live show. Yeah, even though I was attempting to write songs from the time I was about 15 or 16. Yeah, so I kind of did my apprenticeship in the shadows.
But was that a collection of songs that you'd been storing up all that time then that you just got kind of then suddenly released to people? No?
Well, no, they literally came hard and fast from that. Maybe from part of the catalyst for me to come home from Australia was I met another guy I was on a building site, and somebody introduced me to another musician who was from Ireland, and he was writing songs and I was writing songs. We met up and played each other a few songs, and then we started writing a few together. That was kind of like lifting the lid somehow. I knew then I wanted to approach it as a career. I had known for years and years, but I couldn't find the way to do it. I tried leaving work a couple of times but there was no scene where I was in Melbourne. There was a cover scene. There were probably places that were big on original music in a different part of the city, but I just wasn't connected to it. I had no access to that. And so the decision was to come home and to do it here. I don't know why, just I felt maybe just my identity, people would get me more here. And again, to also be around family. But, within, say, 3 weeks of coming home, I found an open mic night. It was just explosive to find that, and to find that there were these other people doing, and there was a whole scene happening here. Some of the biggest names in Irish music over the last 10 or 15 years, there was like Glen Hansard and Paddy Casey, Damien Dempsey, Damien Rice, Gemma Hayes. Most of those people were in that room that night. That first night I walked in.
Wow.
And I just found myself in the thick of it. And I was like, this is the place I need to be. And I went from never performing publicly to playing something like 140 open mic nights that year. I used to sometimes just play my songs and then get on the bus home because I wanted to start writing a song for the next week,
It's almost like the lid's off.
It was crazy, yeah. And I was trying to hold down a day job at the same time to support myself and get a flat and all that. But it was just the cat was well and truly out of the bag. And I think all of those songs on that first record were written in those 3 years, say, I made the record when I was 27. So
it's a magical album, I have to say. I could list every track, like I say, they're all brilliant. And
thanks so much, Dan. Thank you.
Honestly, it's lovely. But Galileo, it was a song that Paul talked about an awful lot at that time, and still now refers to it as the song that he'd most wished he'd written in the past 20, 30 years. How does that feel when a guy like that talks about your song like that?
Oh, it's just so good. I mean, somebody who's been around for as long as he has and who's seen it all come and go, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, to single you out and say, or to single out your song and say, and it was great because at first he did say 20 years and then it was 25 and then it was 30 and I was like, Jesus, this keeps going, we might get 50, Just, for a young artist, I was brand new at the time, obviously, and my first record out in the world, and people are coming and going so quick. And to get an endorsement like that from somebody who's just seen it all was huge, a great confidence booster, and just something that says, okay, yeah, trust your instincts, you know what you're doing. Because when I wrote that song, I was hugely convinced that nobody else would like it. Really, I just wrote it for myself. It reminded me of the music that my granddad used to listen to, these great old kind of Cole Porter and Irving Berlin kind of songs, the kind of songs that people don't write anymore. They were like perfect little universe that you would get lost in. They were designed, I think, for escapism during the war. But some of them I found you could hear a piece of the song and never know where the writer had begun. They were like a circle that joins itself. And I found that fascinating lyrically. And I wouldn't say I studied them, but I loved them. And I listened to a lot of that stuff and I liked it. And I guess it informed in a similar way to Paul, actually. I think there's something we really have in common is that we've never been stuck with one style of music. We kind of move around and we're not afraid to, and me comparing myself to Paul is a dangerous thing. I know, I don't have a fraction of the success he's had and experience, but I think we have that in common. And that was one of the reasons I thought he would be great to work with. But that was where that song came from. And I was surprised more than anybody when it kind of landed, if you like, or it caught on. And it caught on before the record was even out, actually. It was really strange. I was in a band before making the record with a really great friend of mine. He was, again, similarly, when I come home from Australia, this guy, Paddy Casey, he was like the biggest thing on the songwriter scene in Ireland. He was the new kid on the block. He was big signing with Sony and he was selling records like you wouldn't believe. He was doing great. And he asked me to be his guitar player from these open mic nights. He liked my playing and he said, why don't you do this until your thing takes off? It was really generous. And he used to, so I ended up kind of getting an inside track. I used to be in his band. I used to be the opening act and I'd be the guy on stage I was the longest guy on stage. These gigs all around the country and used to go and do radio interviews with him. I'd be a backup guitar player. And so he was really giving me a great insight and it was like an apprenticeship in itself. I'd even sit in on record company meetings and I was hearing all this stuff. I was hearing these A&R guys say, you've got to have 3 singles to put out a record. You've got to have 3 radio friendly things, so putting this record together, this first record, Kyabram, and I was choosing the songs out of the list of songs I had, and I was like, okay, well, I've got to have, there was No Breaks and Your World, One Way Minds. They were the three I was like, okay, they ticked that box. Galileo was way outside. That was just for me. Nobody's going to like that, but I love it. My family will like that. So while I was making the record, I was asked to come out and play on somebody's outside broadcast, you know, like a radio from a venue somewhere, radio show. And again, I was an unknown guy. And the DJ was this guy, Tom Dunn, he had a huge show here, a bit like a John Peel in Ireland. It was called Pet Sounds. Really popular show in the music world. And when I got up to do my stint, I learned later that he went outside for a smoke break because he's like, I don't know who this guy is, you know. And that was cool. And I played 4 songs. One of them was Galileo. I went back to the studio afterwards, you know. You're in a vacuum. You don't know what happened out there. But the next day, apparently, he said his switchboard was jammed with people saying, what was that song that guy played last night? He had to go back and listen to it. And as soon as he heard it, he started playing it off the air.
Wow.
He was playing it every night for weeks, you know, and then I finished the record and my little record company was like, well, I think we know which song to put out. You know, I would have never chose that song. So it was a real, an outside.
Brilliant. I love that. I love that. And you're right, because everything, similar to Paul, every time we get an album from you, you know, from Big Bad Beautiful World to Magpie's Eye to Gold Bars in the Sun, they're very different each time. But the thing that kind of holds it all together for me is the storytelling. And I don't know if you consider yourself a storyteller as much as you do a musician. I don't know. Does it always start with the words? Does it always start with the lyrics and how, you know, what you want to say?
They're the most important thing. Yeah. I don't think I'd write a song if I didn't feel like I had something to say, you know, and if I sit down to try and write something, I'd have to feel like there's some kind of substance coming out, you know. I don't know whether it's just the kind of personality I have, you know, I'm maybe a little in the, I don't know, your OCD category or whatever, you know, not in a bad way, I hope, but, you know, there's things going on and I'm a thinker kind of. And so really I get my inspiration to write a song when an actual idea comes. And early on in my career, when I was, not career, even when I was writing songs first, I remember when I was about 19 or 20 and I was just throwing stuff out there and I had a 4-track recorder and I was putting songs down. And I remember not knowing what the hell I was doing. And I'd listen back to these songs and they were just some kind of stream of consciousness or whatever. And I felt like they were formless lyrically or something, and they used to depress me, you know, and I used to say, what the fuck is that about, you know? I don't know, you know. Sometimes I'd decide after, oh, that's like about that argument I had with my friend, and I would attribute them to something, but I wasn't quite sure. So I actually made a decision and I stopped. I said, I'm not going to write another song until I actually decide what it's going to be about, and maybe write something that's not just depressing or something, but maybe uplifting, but not in a twee way or something, you know, not cliche and hammy. And I stopped for about a year. And when I approached it after that, it was always different. And I think I developed from then onwards to the way I do it now, which is the song is largely written in my head completely before I touch an instrument. And that way I find it challenges you in more ways than that, because you're concentrating on the psychology of it, what people are going to be thinking when they hear certain words. But musically as well, don't just go to old habits on your instrument. Say, like you pick up a guitar to write a song and you might just start strumming a G or something. You go, oh, jeez. G again, you know. So if you just do it in your head and you hear this music and you hear the colors, and then when you're finished, you say, okay, I have to figure out how to play this now. It actually takes you to new places, and it's a challenge as a musician as well. And you have to find, and sometimes it evolves as you're playing. It's still, but you follow a set of instructions that your brain has created. You know, I hope that makes sense. Maybe it sounds weird.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really interesting. And I was talking to Chris Difford and Catherine Williams have been on the podcast, and they're both talking about the power of lyrics and the power of words. And I find that really interesting as a topic, because when you think of the Jam and the songs like That's Entertainment and Private Hell and those, you know, it was obviously a lyrics first thing, telling a story in an amazing way. But when we get to albums like Wake Up the Nation, for instance, and we'll talk more about that in a sec, but you feel that there was, and him talking seemed to be more of a kind of, we're just, you know, throwing words in that fit the song and fit the melody. And it's a entirely different way of working, isn't it?
Well, there is no right way or wrong way, you know, and I think whatever your form is, I can only ever say what's right for me. And sometimes I wish so hard that I could do it the other way. Because you absolutely love songs, you know, like Changing Man or whatever, or, you know, Voodoo Child. And you can tell by certain songs that a song is sometimes a ball of energy. And you know, in a way, that somebody didn't sit there and slave over the lyrics and say, I'm going to move that word, I'm going to change that word, because it's a different kind of song. They have a different kind of power. I don't think I have that ability, or at least I haven't pursued it enough. I feel a bit more like I'm looking into an engine when I try to do that. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I've been doing it my way for so long. And, you know, as you say, people have now described me. I often, people say, concentrate on the word storyteller, which I've never considered myself. I mean, that's blindly happened to me. I don't know why or how. I find the form and the method that people have infinitely interesting. You could talk about it all day, couldn't you? You know, I love the way people write.
It's brilliant. It's fascinating. And as somebody with no talent whatsoever in any of these spaces, can't play a musical instrument, can't write lyrics, can't do any of this stuff, I find it fascinating that when I meet people like yourself who can do it and do it so amazingly well, it's it's a proper art form. But the thing is, it seems to me as well, you draw your, and similar to Paul in a way, with certainly with the jam stuff, and you're, you know, from the inside looking out. So these are these stories that you discover are other people's stories that, and am I right in thinking you don't read fiction, you read non-fiction, and you just pick them up from kind of stories that, some of these things from stories that you find like true stories.
But I can now say that I write fiction.
Yes, we're going to get onto that. I'm excited about that. Your autumn is nuts, my friend. Your autumn is going to be crazy.
Sorry, I went completely off course there.
But you've got a real fascination in true stories and like people's truths, I guess.
I do. I absolutely do. And, you know, I would much quicker watch a documentary or a film, maybe not even necessarily a documentary. I love documentaries, certain ones, but I'd much more watch a film about something that I know happened than something that I think is made up. I'm a bit of a realist, and I like to think about what's relevant or what says something about the way we live. I know everything does in one shape or form, but I'm fascinated with people's lives. And I think, I don't know, I think, and with the past in a way as well, because I think when you look at somebody's life from afar, and maybe even from after their life, you can see in a nutshell what happened, how it ended up, and you can judge the impact of what a decision had. I think that's what fascinates me about it. I'm very nostalgic, almost to a fault, very sentimental. I'm a very emotion-driven person. Yeah, I think it lends itself to what I do, I suppose. Yeah, well, and it comes through. It comes through in the songs. I mentioned "Wake Up the Nation." Let me take you back to 2010, the Olympia Theatre. Paul was there. They did like a residency. It was like 4 nights. I went to that tour in London. I did 5 nights in a row at the Royal Albert Hall. He also did 4 nights at the Olympia Theatre. And you got to go up on stage and play with Paul and play Galileo with Weller. How did that come about? That was great. That was so good. Yeah. Well, I was in the studio in Limerick, I think it was, and I was mastering Magpie's Eye, and Paul called. He might have even already been in town in Dublin. He may have started his residency. I'm not sure. But anyway, he said, would you like to get up and play a couple of songs with me next week or something? And I was like, oh man, of course, you know. And so we showed up, and all the gang were there, a lot of great heads in the band, and I think Lawrence Watson was there taking pictures as well, who ended up taking the pictures for the Arrivals album. Just great heads, and Paul was just in really lovely form. I remember sitting in the dressing room with Paul, and we played through Galileo, and it was kind of teaching him the chords with Stan, as they call him. It was just wonderful. It was just wonderful. And Lawrence took a few pictures of that. I have them somewhere. We were in the dressing room, and I remember seeing Paul ironing his trousers or his shirt or whatever, and I was like, you still iron your own stuff, you know? I don't think he trusts anybody else with the clothes, would he? That was the thing. No, but actually it was interesting because he said the same. He said, I love doing it before a show. And I'm the same. Like I always iron, you know, I'm not as much of a fashionista. I don't know if that's the right word, or, you know, I like wearing nice things on stage, but I always iron something before, and I always find it helps spam me out. It's very zen, kind of like meditating or something. And he said the same, so that was great. And then we also did 2 other songs. We did. He wanted to do "Black Is the Color," which is a famous folk song made famous by Chrissy Moore that he loved, and we did that. And we did all along the Watchtower as well.
Oh, brilliant. Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Wow.
it was great. And we sat on stools on stage, you know. I hadn't seen him in a few years, actually. I remember, and I'd let my hair grow. And when I met him coming onto the wings of the stage, he says, "You done something with your bonnet."
Now let's fast forward to 2021, to this year. There we are, lockdown 2, and this bloody beauty arrivals, the LP. I mean, it's always lovely to get a new album from you, as I say, but this one produced by Paul Weller. So there was the connection with Weller. How did that come about? Was you reaching out to Paul?
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah. You know, we're in touch kind of sporadically over time, mostly when I send Paul a record. Sometimes he just reaches out and says something nice or whatever, or says hello. And I think I had, we're talking 3 years ago now, and it might have been beginning of 2019. And one morning here, I had True Meanings had just come in the post on vinyl, and I stuck it on, and I was getting my son ready for a creche. I was just listening to it in the background, and I was just going, Jesus, that sounds good. Really, really comfortable. You can really just hear how relaxed he is in the studio. You know, I was thinking, how many fucking hours has he spent in the studio over the years? Must be just so. And I was kind of going, I'd love to be a fly on the wall, see him working in the studio, and you could learn so much. And that was all going on. And then in the back of my head, for probably a year before that moment, I'd been saying to myself, I think I'd like to work with a producer on this record. I've never done it before, because the songs that were coming, you know, The Harbour and Stars Over Kinvara, all these kind of things, they were pretty stripped back songs. You know, I was almost hearing them with just me and a guitar. I was trying to think, who could I ask, you know, because I don't want to just go to some producer I don't know because they're a name or some hot producer or something like that. And I was like, I want somebody who gets my music and somebody who I would admire enough to listen to their suggestions. And what has happened with music, to its detriment, I think, in recent decades even, perhaps, is that in many cases, the record has become more about the producer than the artist. You get a lot of these producers, you know, like the likes of Rick Rubin, T-Bone Burnett, and all that. And not to say that they're not brilliant and they do brilliant things for people's music, nothing like that. And they're the good ones, actually. They're the good ones. They're the ones, like, if somebody said to me, Rick Rubin's on the phone, he wants to produce a record, I'd say, fuck, give me the phone. You know? That's cool. Yeah. You know, so I'll just get that straight. I'm not insulting those guys. You know? I'm here, call, you know. But I think that's dangerous. You know, and I think record companies get involved and hire producers for that reason, because they know a producer is going to make somebody's record sound a certain way and it's going to have a big name because of the producer, no matter who the young band is or whatever. And so I was allergic to that. I didn't want that. But I did know that I wanted to work with somebody, and I knew personally where I was in my life as well. I didn't want to be so in control of everything on my own. You know, I was like, I want to just enjoy work with people and kind of just let the hair down a little bit and just enjoy the experience. And so all that had been going on in my head. And like I said, this morning I was listening to that record and all those thoughts came into my head. And at some point the two just went bang, and it was like a little spark, you know, and I was like, wow, maybe Paul's the guy, you know. And then it was like, but I wonder, would he say yes, or would he say fuck off or whatever? I didn't know, you know. So before I chickened out, you know, then I got my son off the creche or whatever, and probably on the way back or something, I sent him a text, you know, and I just said, hey, have you ever produced anyone before, you know? And I got a lovely response back straight away, and it was, let me hear some stuff, you know. I'm really honored, and I'd love to be involved if I can, if I feel like I can help or feel like I can bring something to the table when I hear the stuff. That was really it. And from that point on, it was just, I felt for the risk I took in sending that message, I was just rewarded. They say the universe is listening, and I believe in that stuff. You know, when you know, they say if you want to achieve something that seems outrageous or whatever, don't try and think of every step. You think of the first step, you know, and you just take a step, and it's, the universe will take 10 to meet you in the other direction if you take a chance. You know, I found that to be true, no matter how hippy dippy it sounds or whatever. But there's something in it. You know, I think I was just paid back in spades. And, you know, it was, hopefully, I think the record is proof of that.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And we'll talk about the songs and stuff in a second. What I'd love to know is, because I mean, it was fairly soon after True Meanings. So True Meanings was out in the September. Paul then did the shows at the Royal Festival Hall October. And then you're over at Black Barn Studios in Surrey, Paul's HQ, the following April. So it's quite a quick turnaround. Did you have all those songs written and ready to go? Or was it actually, once Paul said yes, you frantically had to start writing more material to fill out the album? How did it work?
Most of them were written. I'm kind of generally, anyway, up until that point, or up until lockdown, when I started writing, as I said, a book. I haven't written any songs during lockdown, but or very little. But on average, over the years, I would average kind of a song a month, I think, And so there's always a backlog there. But most of those songs were very current, and I had been gigging them for, say, a year or two beforehand.
Okay, right.
I think The Harbour was probably the oldest of them. That was the one when it came out. And out of me, I mean, not released, when it came out, I kind of went, it felt like just a little shift, in a direction for an album, and songs kind of came in the wake of that. I think, at a guess, I'd say 8 or 9 of what were on the record were written. There's only 10 on it, actually, but yeah. So when I met Paul in Black Barn, I walked in with I had sent him maybe 13 or 14 songs, demos. Mostly when I say demos, they were just live recordings from gigs. I don't do many demos really, but he instantly steered me towards a certain kind of song, the ones that were more intimate. That was a fascinating part of the process, because I remember asking him, do you think in this day and age even, do you think we should, and this was before we even met up, I was like, do you think we should pursue a kind of an element of it, or a song or two that are geared towards radio? Because like I said, I had piles of songs, but it was which ones to choose. And I had all of these new ones, which I didn't feel were very radio orientated. And his answer was great. He just said, well, he was quite frank and honest. And he just said, well, fuck knows what gets on radio anyway. So what is the point in even trying to aim for that? He said, I just think we try to make a great record. And that's what ultimately stands up to the test of time, if you can achieve that. So I said, that's fucking music to my ears. And it was great. It was like licensed to indulge more in the place I inhabit, which is not really geared towards radio, So anyway, I arrived in. There was still a little bit of weeding out to do, obviously, because some of them I played, and, I played them one go, and he'd kind of go, I like that, but I don't think it fits with the others, keep it for something else. These ones definitely. And it started to take this shape of this very intimate, personal, like I likened it to a portrait, actually, a self-portrait in a way. I would have never chose that group of songs on its own if it had been just me.
Really?
Right. So that was the first impact he had on it, and it was huge, And I'm so proud of the way it turned out in that way, because it shows you in a certain light. And then ultimately what happened was he had whittled it down to maybe 9 songs. We did 2-3 day recording lumps. In between the two, which were about a month apart, he said to me, we have about 9. We're 3 minutes short, or in other words, or the other way of looking at it, you have 3 minutes to play with on vinyl. You have 3 more minutes if you want to fill them. He said, write me another song. And so I said, okay, cool. And I loved the challenge, So a week later, I sent him 2 brand new songs. And one of them was Painter's Light, which ended up with the opening track, So had it half written for a while, and I felt that it belonged with these songs, but I hadn't been able to finish it for some reason. So when he asked for one more, it gave me the right injection, and just was the right time, So I think it really worked. Brilliant.
I mean, that's a lovely opening. That line, one day I'll be an artist, I'll rise up with the dawn. It's a lovely opening to an album. I didn't realise that was a last minute kind of addition. I like that.
Yeah. A last minute, first minute.
And on that is you, so you on guitar and vocal, and Paul Weller on vibes, right? So is that what you mean by that?
Well, no, not just actual vibe, but not just vibrations like.
Oh right, it's okay. Is that his vibes an actual instrument?
He actually played the vibes on it too. Yeah.
Oh okay.
And there brings us nicely to the other amazing thing that he did was, and I mentioned before that I felt, even though I completely handed it over to him and to, his suggestions and whatever he was going to suggest, I was gonna go along with and give it a go, But I was almost sure that it would just be me and my guitar. I thought his contribution would more be cut that bit off there or make that a bit longer, or you don't need that verse, that kind of thing, As well, maybe I was just blind to the sonic element, but as soon as we got into the studio, he said, I think what we should do is add just these subtle little textures, like brush strokes, just a little bit, a few bars or something here, a bit of Hammond on there, a bit of, and part of me was just like frightened, because in my experience and having produced my other 6 records or whatever, I had, and I'll say wrongly, come to a point where I believed that you cannot introduce something out of nowhere in the middle of, say, a naked song and then take it out. I wonder sometimes if I should even draw attention to that, but, because then you're conscious of it, but really it doesn't matter. What happened was he made the suggestion. I said, of course, let's do it. But I wasn't prepared for how well it worked. I couldn't believe that in every single case, it actually worked. And, and it didn't stick out like a sore thumb. It was just like some little thing, and it just enhanced it. And somehow it made them, like it could have, I thought, just me and a guitar, it could have sounded like an old 60s record. And that way it could have been almost dated sounding. But somehow these little textures brought it into the present that made it contemporary, and it was a stroke of genius, I thought, and it really just worked. And he played them, but for the most part, apart from the strings, say, for example, or Ben's drums, but on maybe 5 or 6 songs, anyway, he played a few bars of something. And on Painter's Light, it was the Vibes, which is essentially like a vibraphone. A vibraphone is a percussion instrument, like a xylophone, but they're big wooden blocks. But he played through a mellotron, which is like a cool 60s instrument, which you'd hear on the likes of Strawberry Fields. It's like a keyboard that has pieces of tape inside. It's an all analog, really cool instrument. And so, next time you listen to the song, you might listen out for it and see where it is. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, we'll do. But Hannah Peel's been on the podcast recently, and some of those brushstrokes that you talk about come from working with Hannah as well. What did she add to the album?
She was just great. She was fantastic. And Paul's suggestion again, she did all the string arrangements and brought in the players too. She just nailed it. And again, coming from a place where I was handing it over and really, I was ready for this, but I've worked with some arrangers in the past, but at times I've done it myself. I've scored things for orchestras and stuff on my records, because I had a series of concerts with orchestras over the years, maybe a dozen concerts with the orchestra in Dublin over 6, 7, 8 years. And I took it as an opportunity to learn how to do that, because I even since Kyabram, myself and Steve Wickham from the Waterboys, the fiddler from the Waterboys, we designed all of the string parts for Galileo and what have you. So from very early on, I was hands-on with that stuff. And slowly over the years, I worked up to orchestral arrangements, which is not that different, really. It might sound scary, but it's if you can hear the music in your head as much as you hear a guitar solo, say, then you just figure out how to write it down. And it might be 12 violins playing instead of 1. In principle, that's what it is. It's not that complex, I think, but to do it really well is the art. And Hannah just does it so great. So when she came in and brought in these parts that, again, were something I wouldn't have done, as in when I heard them, I was like, wow, I would have never gone there. And I loved where she went. And so it was very freeing. It was very liberating. And just, I really felt it worked and really complemented the songs and brought a flavor that I didn't have in my kit. And I think in that way, all around, no matter who, whether it was Paul or Hannah or all the other musicians. It was a really great learning curve to just learn to trust what other people bring.
It's a remarkable album, I have to say. It's lovely. And so many people have messaged. I said about the fact that you were coming on the podcast. So many people have messaged to say, that The Harbour was their favourite song of the year. Like the amount of people who have said that's just an absolutely incredible song. How much they love the album, but so many questions as well. So I've got a few of them for you, if you don't mind. So Sean Wilson, if there was one thing that really surprised you about Paul, what would it be as a musician and a person?
What surprised me for a start was how gentle he was. You know, I'd met him a couple of times. I knew he was very humble and kind of quiet, really. You know, I know he has a reputation for being a bit of a hard nut, you know, kind of, or can be, you know, kind of, you know what I'm saying. He can be kind of, and
a moody old bugger is what you meant, yeah.
No, you would laugh at that. Not moody, but yeah, you know, like defensive.
Yeah,
you know, because I'm sure people get his goat up at times, and I'm sure when you're at that level, it happens a lot. So I expected a little bit of that, or not even expected it. I wouldn't have been surprised, you know. But I was just so disarmed by the person he is, and how really, and the chemistry that we had instantly, you know, and how well we got on. And he was very endearing and affectionate and generous in every sense, you know, and I was just so impressed by that. You were living next door to each other in the cottages at Blackbarn when you were staying there, was that right?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And I read a story, you talk about connection, I read a story about what was it that you said the same thing, exactly the same moment or something like that, was that right?
Yeah, that was literally when we were down to the track listing, the running order, and we were kind of going, okay, well, we know that should be last song on side A. We always thought of it as vinyl, you know. That's a great opening track for side 2, you know, and we figured if we got those 4 points right, start of side 1, start of side 2, and the, you know, the rest would fall into place kind of. And there was a bit of massaging between our two opinions to find the sweet spot for everything. But in the end, when it was kind of settling and it was, you know, we kind of had a pretty solid running order and we were testing it out, and we were both kind of listening, from him from London, me from here, and Charles was mixing and sending us rough masters to listen to, you know, and I had a listen, just going to sleep one night here, and we were getting really close to the time. It was like, okay, we've got to sign off now, kind of. And I had a listen just lying in bed, or went through my head or something, and first 3 songs, and I kind of listened through every line, and it struck me that those first 3 songs, I was like, Jesus, that is my life right now. You know, it's really paints how I feel about where I am. And it's just happened. And the next day I was talking to him about something, and he said, you know what? I think those first 3 songs are just your life now, or something. It was almost the same words. And I was like, fuck, you know, it was...
Wow.
Because, you know, it was like, it really showed me how down in the trenches he was with me, you know, because not everybody would get that, and not everybody listens so deeply. And it's not probably so apparent as it seems to recognize that, you know, because, you know, like you can even say The Harbour, there's only a snippet of that song that's really about me. The first verse is about Johnny and the second one's about Pete, and, you know, but still it was... So it would take somebody to really listen to get that. That was just really, really great. And that typified everything that happened with him. But as a musician as well, I remember when we played this thing that we share, and he said, how about a bit of piano on this? You know, and I was like, okay, yeah, cool. And I was like, it had somehow escaped my attention that he played piano. I didn't know he played piano. I thought he might noodle on the keys a bit or whatever. And so I sat in the control room, and he went in and he was like, all right, Charles, you ready? And he's got the cans on. And he started doing this fucking Liberace stuff, rolls up the piano. And I was like, holy shit. What are you doing there? Who's in there, you know? And that blew me away. When he came out, he says, what do you think? Was that all right? And he seemed a little bit nervous, in my opinion. I was like, was it fucking all right? I said, Jesus Christ, mind blown.
That's a lovely way to close the album, that song as well. I really love that. It's a beautiful, beautiful track. There's one track actually a few people have asked me about as well, which is, you mentioned The Stars of Kinvara, which is beautiful. That's one of those 3 opening songs that you mentioned. But the Olympian. So this is for the Syrian swimmer, Yusra Mardini. This is a remarkable story that I'm guessing, again, you must have found through reading a book or watching a documentary, I'm assuming.
Well, I'll tell you really honestly, that one came from, I was almost handed that song on a plate, and it was by my wife.
Oh, right.
So my wife is, how we met was she's a cellist, but she doesn't really do it for a living anymore. She's in the film industry now. She's been in stunts for years, and she was the first stunt woman in Ireland, and did it for years, right up until our son was coming along a few years ago, and it was like, well, you can't really throw yourself off when you're pregnant, So, but she had been moving towards getting into the directing of stunts by that stage and coordinating, So, she's a creative person as well. That's the point I'm making. But we were sitting in the car somewhere, and she said to me one day, "I'm going to write a song." I was like, "What?" Okay, and I was kind of half not surprised, but I started to scribble down everything she said, because I knew from being a writer that sometimes the first way you say something is so important, the way it comes out, because you'd be trying to remember, how did I say that? And it's impossible. You're chasing a ghost, So it's really important to capture your first thoughts on something. And so I started to just write it down on my phone while she was driving, and I was just going to give it to her and say, "This is what you said." And at that point, she said, I was only joking. You write it anyway, But she had literally laid out the story about Yusra Mardini and the incident, which was crossing the sea as a refugee, and a boatload of people trying to escape at night and cross over to Greece. And it was such a powerful story, And I mean,
was it the engine packed up and she was like treading water for hours on end? Was that right?
Yeah, they were in some kind of a dinghy with an engine, I suppose. And there was, I think, about 20 people in it, young and old. And the way I heard the story, the engine packed in, and they're a mile out into the water, and they were probably going to drift out to sea, or God knows what, But and so they had little choice. But Yusra, who had been training to be a swimmer all her life and it was her dream to be an Olympic swimmer. Her and her sister, who was also a swimmer, they jumped out, and possibly another couple of people, and they pulled the boat swimming for 3 hours to the coast of Greece. And it was just like, this person who wants to be an Olympian, I was like, that is everything that you would imagine is heroic, isn't it? When you hear that, the original story about how the Olympics got their name or whatever was the guy who had to run a marathon to bring a message to, something like that. And it was like, that is an Olympic effort, much more than half of the stuff you read about in the news with athletes taking performance enhancing drugs and everything. So I was like, that is the gold medal there, and that was what I focused on for the song. And I also thought, especially because she was a refugee, a displaced person, I mean, the world needs to hear stories like that right at this time, because people are so undervalued. Life is so undervalued. And there's so much backlash against the movement of people in the world, and I thought this is the story for that,
Yeah. There's a question from Alex McLaughlin on Twitter, actually. How did you feel watching her carrying the flag of the Refugee Olympic team in the opening ceremony this year?
It's just so powerful. It's so powerful that she actually made it to the other side and then was chosen to be a member of this first team of displaced peoples that the Olympic Committee put together. In 2016, she swam, and she won a race or two, I believe, that was where the opening lines came from. And then we knew she was training for 2020 again, which became 2021. I mean, her story and the person she is, I believe she's very active, and she's been chosen as an ambassador by the UN for refugees around the world. And so it's brilliant. It's brilliant that she gets to be that person, and she's the right person to do it.
Yeah, well, it's a brilliant song, and it's a great album. So I congratulate you on that. And the great thing is, I mentioned what a busy autumn it is. The great thing is, we get to see you do it live very, very soon. So November, coming over to England, a bit of Scotland, and then a full Irish tour in March next year as well. So what have you got planned? I'm coming to King's Place. I cannot bloody wait. I have to say, it's been a while since I've seen you live. What can we expect?
Brilliant. Well, King's Place, we're going to we're going to have a quartet and a couple of musicians. So.
Oh wow,
that's going to be great. I think King's Place is almost sold out actually, so there's just a handful of tickets left for that. And the other shows around the country are going to be pretty much just me, I think. So I'm just really looking forward to it. And there's some places I've never been, and some places that I have been, but not for a long time. Quite a few of them I've only ever even opened a show in the city, like Cambridge or places like that. So, and they're beautiful places. So I just, going to be my first chance to get out and play this album to people, after it's nearly 2 years since I was on stage, really.
Yeah, that's mad, isn't it? I mean, that must be 2019. Yeah, I mean, do you feel nervous about it, or is it more like actually it's but like getting back on a bike? That also.
It is. I think. I haven't. Interesting because I've talked to Paul about this a few times because he has really missed it. I think I didn't miss it terribly. And I think that's because I've got a young family, and I was really, really enjoying the time with my little boy and just getting to not miss that, But also, I wrote a book, and I don't mean to keep throwing that in there, but that's what I actually did. And so creatively, I was so immersed in that I was happy to, it gave me I was like, when this is over, I'll be back to doing what I normally do. Who knows when I'll ever get a break like this again, because it's so hard to have a routine to do anything different when you're constantly going out playing shows. So I was like, I'm not going to hurry it up. When it comes along, I'll be happy to get back up there again. And we did a live stream for the album, which in April, it was filmed as an actual concert, even though there wasn't an audience there. We actually just played it as a performance all the way through. It felt so natural. It was, even without the audience, I have to say, I was amazed at how normal it felt just being up there. I think Paul and I talked about that on the little chat we had at the end of the live stream, actually. And I think we both agreed it was because when you're up there, even though there's a crowd in front of you, sometimes you're in a different place in your head anyway, because you're performing and you're thinking about the lyrics and what have you, So, and I had one show about a month ago as well. It was like a toe in the water. I had to be almost dragged out to do it by my manager. Like, get out there and do a fucking gig.
Have a practice, come on.
Yeah, but kind of, but it was, and it was in Galway City, which is just, half an hour from here. So, I was like, okay, I'll go out and do it. And, the most enjoyable part of it for me, whatever it says, is that the rehearsal the day before the gig, I just sat with these musicians in a room. We didn't plug anything in. We just sat there and played music, and it was just really nice. It was just really nice. And to hear the sound wrap around you and, the stringed instruments, and that was just, and I was like, God, yeah, I didn't miss it, but I like this place. And it was fascinating to almost say, when you played the song, it was like unwrapping Christmas presents. They were already made, and it was like, oh, wow, we've got these songs and they work, and I can remember how to do them, and it's easy. And, so it was really nice. And the gig was quite nice too. A little surreal, I have to say, in an enjoyable way. I think I was very aware, more than I normally am, of the audience, and just maybe how special it is to do that, to get to do that, just to see it from almost new eyes, as if you'd never done it before. There was one part of my head was like that. So I'm looking forward to just doing that more. I think, in a way, I think I'll never see it the same way again.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I've been to a couple of gigs since lockdown has passed over the past few months, and each one has felt like an emotional experience in a really strange way. And I don't know if this is just a getting older thing. I don't think so. But for instance, I was at a book launch, and Ocean Colour Scene did Simon from Ocean Colour Scene did a little acoustic number, and it took me back to like 20 odd years or whatever, 25 years to when I was a younger man. But I think a lot of it was about the fact that we've missed that over the past 18 months, and that kind of live music, that interaction with other people and stuff. It's such a special thing, isn't it?
It is. Well, I mean, I think that works on quite a few levels. One is being surrounded by people again, and a kind of a social thing, which is of itself is a very interesting thing, and the effects that has on us because we haven't been able to do that. But we still don't understand many things about what music does to us, on a scientific level. I mean, we don't know why it has the effect it has on our emotions, and, even take away the lyrical content or whatever, which is very cerebral and you're actually thinking, processing words. But what sound does, the sonic waves when they hit your body, and it's almost a spiritual thing, or it is a spiritual thing, And so I think experiencing that from the perspective of being starved of it for so long as well is bound to be really interesting and enriching, or like being fed for the first time in a while.
Just gobbling it up. So I had an email from you. I think it was a personal email from you the other week, and it said, "It's with great pleasure that I share the news with you here of my forthcoming literary debut, The Pawnbroker's Reward, a work of historical fiction which will be released to bookshops on October the 29th this year." I assume it was just to me. I'm not sure. But this is really exciting. So this is your lockdown project, was it?
That was my lockdown project, yeah. I had started the book around even before arrivals, actually. Right. February 2018, I went and had a meeting with a publisher who only 6 months before that I had released a record. So ended 2017, I released a record called Chronicles of the Great Irish Famine. I had kind of worked on it for 16 or 17 years, reading and I tell you where it came from. I learned around the year 2000, 2001, that my granddad, who he had been dead for quite a number of years, but he was kind of mysterious. He had a mysterious background. He came from where I live now in the west of Ireland, this little fishing village, really scenic place, Kinvara. We found on his birth cert, trying to find out a little bit more about his past, which was it was something secretive about it. But we found out, it said that he was born in a workhouse. It was because he was born out of wedlock. That was ultimately his story, and that led to all the mystery of his past and what have you. But in a way, it was a gateway to me, because I was like, what's a workhouse? And all my family were the same. I don't know if people in England know generally what workhouses are. They were an English model, but of course, because we were an English colony at the time, it was laid out here too. But you're going back to Charles Dickens and that time. Well, that's what most people's picture of a workhouse is when they think about it. Oliver, that was a workhouse. And basically, they were at the time before we had a social welfare system, a social security system, a national healthcare system. They were the beginnings of society moving towards that. What do we do with our poor? What do we do with our homeless people and tramps and vagrants and infirm people? And, so it was the beginning of that. And, they were laid out all across England. It's a fascinating history. And then they did the same in Ireland in a slightly different fashion because the elite of the political establishment at the time, they didn't believe that Ireland's poor were as deserving, so it was done in a slightly different way. But nevertheless, I was like, what is a workhouse? And actually, here it is. So this book, it happens to be sitting on my desk. So that book I bought that 20 years ago. And basically, I was walking through the biggest bookshop in Dublin, which is called Easton's on O'Connell Street. And there was a bargain bin, like a basket, full of that book. It's called The Workhouses of Ireland, The Fate of Ireland's Poor, right? And they were like €1 or £1. And it was literally months after I'd learned this about my granddad. I was just like, there's my chance to find out what a workhouse was. And I'll read you what happened. I sat upstairs on the bus and I opened it, and we're literally first page in, and halfway down it says, in Ireland, these things were laid out right on the eve of the famine. Early 1840s, there was 131 of them built all across the country. And so it says, the man who carried his wife from the workhouse to their old home, mile after weary mile, and was discovered next morning dead, his wife's feet held to his chest as if he were trying to warm them.
Oh, man.
I was just like, I remember sitting there just going, and feeling like the hair stand up on my neck. And, we didn't learn about this in school. really. You know, it was like a footnote in the history books we learned about, like World War One, and you know, this thing that was practically so big on our own doorstep that, you know, comparatively, it's like World War Two. The amount of our population that it affected, 1 million people died out of, you know, 8 million at the time. And it began this wave of emigration that never stopped. And Ireland has more people across the world. 70 million people or something claim Irish heritage across the world. That little story just so blew my mind. And I thought it was a very powerful thing. It took me years to unravel why it affected me so much. And I thought that there was a lot of beauty in it. You know, it was like this man in what people are capable of in their own, say, darkest hour, that he gave the last warmth of his body to the woman he loved, you know. Who doesn't wish that they could be that to somebody, you know? And I thought it just humanizes it again, because all we have from that time, even though it's not that long ago, are these kind of images, you know, they're hand drawn, they're like cartoons, and they don't
connect, do they?
You don't realize it, you know. And I thought, and the other thing I learned was examining my own feelings about what I felt in that moment, retrospectively, if you like, was that I understood what that meant when in my mind, I imagined it happening to my own family, my own mother and father, or if they're my children. And that's when you kind of go, oh, geez. So, you know, and realizing that made me realize that that's how we experience empathy, is by putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And that began my journey into, I thought, well, I tried to turn that into a song. And the more I read that book, trying to find out more about those people, I kept finding more stories, you know.
That album, I remember watching you. I remember seeing you live at the Irish Club in London. This would have been about 9-10 years ago, maybe now. You talking about that being a work in progress, that kind of, I think it was a song you played from it. And The Chronicles of the Great Irish Famine was the album that came out a few years back, like you say. But you weren't even at that point at that moment. But the songs on it are beautiful. But there's a track called Along the Western Seaboard I was going to mention. I mean, these are these kind of really incredible personal accounts, these songs, that actually resonate with some of the stuff that's going around the world right now, in terms of when you look at it.
Well, that was my whole idea of doing it, but not only to kind of examine the history as well properly, which has never been done in a way, not in the arts as well, but was that it had a relevance. When I realized that thing about empathy, I thought we have so much to learn from this. We can still learn from this, and people who can read something like that and experience empathy can transfer that into now and be a kind of person who will not allow that to happen again, you know? And so it is how we have to learn and how we have to prevent things happening. And that's why it's relevant. That's why these stories, I think, are important to keep alive, because they have a universal truth in them that applies to everybody. You know, what happened was, on the back of that record coming out, a publisher heard me talking about that. And 17 years after I had read that book and started this journey, when I put out the record of songs, I thought, okay, I'm putting that to bed now. And then this publisher came along and said, would you like to write a book? I was like, really? I thought I was. So I wasn't finished with it. And what happened then, even more strangely, was a few months after that, I was playing a concert in a place called Skibbereen in southwest of Ireland. And afterwards, a man came up to me. I was kind of saying hello to a few people, and as you do, selling a few CDs and what have you. And this guy waited right until the end, and he came up and he had waited. He was the last guy, and we had a little chat. Real nice man. And he wanted to know, in particular, he was asking about that story. He said that his father came from right near where that happened. And one thing led to another. And I asked him if he'd heard of a specific tiny little place. You're talking about like a crossroads, essentially. You know, they're called townlands, they call them. It's not like a village. It's just the name of a piece of road. And he said, I haven't heard of it, but leave it with me, you know. And I was staying around for another few days in this area. It was the middle of summer. And I heard from him through somebody the next day. So I called him up and he said, well, I called my cousin who called another guy, and somebody spoke to somebody in the shop or whatever. And said, I not only found out where the place was, he said, but we have found the guy who owns the land that family lived on. And he said the remains of the cottage is there. It was covered, you know, like bushes and gorse and whatever. And a fire exposed it a few years ago. I ended up standing there looking at the place that this happened the next day. And it was just crazy. And I just thought, this story is not finished with me, and I had to delve into it. And that's what became the book.
Wow, brilliant.
So lockdown was a perfect time to immerse myself in. And when it kicked in last March, I was actually just starting to really apply myself properly after a few fits and starts and a few solid months here and there. But I didn't miss a single day during lockdown. For over 6 months, 7 days a week, I locked myself into this room and worked on it. And it was one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done.
Brilliant. And how do you feel about it nearly being out in the world? Because that must be, how does it feel different to the release of an album?
Not so different in that way, except that it's a bit more blind, because like with songs, you're testing them out on people and you might be trying them out at gigs and that kind of thing. So you have a sense of people's feelings for them. But this was literally me. I mean, I wrote it myself, and then I did a second version. I wrote it in pencil first, and then I transferred it into the computer. And then an editor came on board through the publisher, and we worked on it together for 6 months. It went through 3 or 4 more evolutions, kind of. He would say, can you expand that little bit or what have you? And but apart from me and him, I didn't even tell my wife what it was about, so I'm locking myself in a room every day. So you're really in a bubble. And but I think from, if I'd have never written an album or a song before, it might have been really scary. But in a way, I reckon, having written a couple of 100 songs, they all have a beginning and a middle and an end. So you know how to shape something. And I trusted myself, and I knew that because I was so immersed in it and because I was interested in it and passionate about it and didn't want to leave it. It was really something I didn't want to close the lid on. I enjoyed it that much. I was like, I want to get a T-shirt made that says, I spent lockdown in 1846, But I knew that was a good sign. And if you can enjoy it, then you know that somebody else will,
Yeah.
Because that's your only thing to go on, is to trust your own instincts. If you try and write a song and you don't like it, it's very, very hard to finish. You're like, oh my God, this is icky, it's like, so you just trust that gut instinct on. If something keeps calling you, then it's okay,
You're back full circle to Galileo, aren't you? It's exactly the same thing, really. It's that album, that song that didn't think was for radio or whatever. But you absolutely loved it, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you're so right. You're so right.
Hey, Declan, this has been so lovely to spend time with you. I have 2 final questions for you, all right? Back to Mr. Weller. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. Which Paul Weller song are you going to go with?
Wow. Well, look, okay, I think That's Entertainment is an absolute all-time classic, which I love, and I could easily pick that. But I think some of his modern stuff is so great as well, and my favorite of his modern stuff, and I think he's going to new places, and I listen to them, and I have a fairly good understanding of music in terms of, you can listen to something and say, I know what that guy is doing musically. You can understand, as a musician or whatever, but I don't know how he comes up with some of this stuff, really. And there's been one on each of the last few records that have really, and they're kind of similar. They're in a similar vein. And on True Meanings, it was Aspects. And then he's got Rockets that was on Sunset. And then what's the name of the one? Still Glides the Stream. Is that the right title?
Yeah.
They're just beautiful songs, really, really beautiful songs. And they just take me away, you get lost in them. So they're it for me. They're my faves.
Okay. Final question. The purpose of this podcast is, really it's to talk to lovely people like yourself, I'll be honest with you, but it's also to get that interview with Paul Weller that I never managed in my radio career. If it happens, when it happens, what should I talk to him about? Is there anything you think I should ask him, or a topic of conversation you think will go down well?
Oh, wow. You haven't done one with him yet.
Never done it in my radio career. I gave up as a presenter 10 years ago because I wasn't as good as I wanted to be and was earning no money. Yeah, never interviewed him. Always
not the vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's going to happen, I'm sure. Well, of course, I can't say that for him. And I think you would get on great. I would say what to talk to him about. I don't know. I think it's well and capable in your hands. And I'm going to tell you to trust yourself the same way that I do. And you said it yourself. it's that same thing with Galileo or whatever. And I wouldn't say that if I hadn't spent an hour or so talking to you and really enjoying it, appreciating your questions and thinking that you know exactly what you're doing.
God bless you.
So I think it's all in your hands. I look forward to hearing that when it happens.
Bless you, mate. Well, look, I really look forward to seeing you live in November. Good luck with the book as well.
Don't think it will be available in shops in England yet. I'm not sure, but I will have it on tour with me.
To the merch stand we go. Declan, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Dan. Thank you. You're a great guy and really enjoyed that. Thank you. Good luck.
My thanks once again to the amazing Declan O'Rourke. You must dig into his back catalogue. A real joy to spend time in his company and another very, very special episode of this podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do leave a review. It helps us to find new listeners. And please do share on your social media channels. You can find me on Twitter at WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook. It's Paul Weller Fan Podcast. You can also buy me a coffee and find information about my guests in the show notes for this podcast. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.